Good evening, everyone. My name is Peter Metcalf, and I'm the Executive Director at Glacier-Two Medicine Alliance, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to tonight's second installment of this summer's Two Medicine Voices speaker series, which is exploring protecting and conserving wildlife populations on the Rocky Mountain front. And as you all know, tonight we'll be talking about moose population abundance and the research that Landon Magee is doing. Before we get into that, I just want to share a little bit about Glacier-Two Medicine Alliance and our speaker series and some of the upcoming events that we have this summer. So first off, many of you I recognize, it's great to see you. Many I don't, it's really great to have you here. Please stick around afterwards and introduce yourself or have some conversation. And anything, there's more information on anything I'm about to introduce that's on the back table, so you can definitely check that out as well. But as I said, tonight's our second installment in our Two Medicine Voices speaker series. We have a number of other forthcoming talks also related to wildlife. At the end of the month, we have, unique for us, we have a talk that we're hosting over in Whitefish, Montana. Normally all of our conversations are right here, either at the community hall or at the lodge, but we were able to co-host Ben Goldfarb. And he's an author who recently wrote a book called Crossings, and it's kind of one of the best books out there right now on how roads impact wildlife and the ways that people are working to try to help wildlife move across the road and fish and other species as well. So that'll be our next installment in the speaker series, and we'll be back here in July for a conversation with Chris Downs, and I think Jeremiah North Big Ann maybe joined him from Blackfeet Fish Wildlife as well to talk about work the park and Blackfeet are doing to protect native trout fisheries. And then we'll finish up the speaker series with Lisa Bake here in August, talking about bat conservation and sheep biologist for Glacier National Park. So we have a really great series coming up this summer, and we invite you to check that out. A couple other things I also want to highlight this next week. If you're around and interested and like to take on the scourge of noxious weeds, we're participating in the annual Noxious Weeds Spray Day hosted by the Park Service in the Highway 2 corridor. We have some more information about that in the back. We're always looking for volunteers. You need to bring your own backpack sprayer, but we'll be doing some work to help target weeds at some of the trailheads in the campground up at Summit. And it's pretty amazing to see the work our group has done over the years in some of these spots, really particularly pushing back on spotted knapweed. And then next week is the ENE Days that's hosted by the Blackfeet Buffalo Program and the ENE Initiative. It's a big community event. There's information about 3 days celebrating the return of and restoration of bison to Blackfeet lands and culture here locally. And then at the end of the event on Saturday, we're excited to host a special screening of the movie Bring Them Home. That tells the story of the decades-long effort by the Blackfeet community to restore bison here to the Blackfeet Reservation. So, really cool movie, documents a lot of efforts over the years, and we'll be showing that, I believe it's 7 o'clock.
6:30.
No?
6:30. 6:30.
6:30 on that evening here as well. We also have a lot of hikes that have been going on right now this summer. We've had 2 great outings, one looking at grizzly bear ecology and another one looking at birds and plants. We have our next walk will be the 4th of July weekend, and it's a wildflower walk led by Lou. And hopefully we'll have a chance to go and see bitterroots in particular. So if that's something that's of interest to you or any of our other walks, we have walks going on throughout the summer. Information about that is in the back as well. So, other thing I forgot to say just a little bit about us, Glacier-Two Medicine Alliance. For those of you who aren't familiar with this, we're a conservation organization based here in East Glacier on the Blackfeet Nation. We've been around since 1984, and we work predominantly to protect the wild and cultural lands of Badger-Two Medicine, as well as to help restore and conserve other wildlife species here in the area. We also do some work around land management with Glacier Park and support a variety of different Blackfeet land conservation initiatives on the reservation. This last fall, we celebrated a big victory when we were able to complete the retirement of all 47 oil and gas leases that had originally been issued in the Badger-2 medicines. So that was a really big victory for us. It was something we worked on for a long time with a lot of partners. And it was really an exciting moment towards trying to keep this whole area wild and connected. I mentioned Ben Goldfarb at the top, at the start of this introduction. One of the next things we're taking on as an organization is trying to help ensure that wildlife can continue to move between the park and national forest lands to the south across the Highway 2 corridor. So we got some more information about the work we're doing on that, but it's a really exciting, it'll be a long-term project for us to help kind of ensure that we can keep these landscapes connected for all manners of species. So if you want to learn more about that, you can come to Ben's talk, or you can check out, talk to me afterwards and what we're doing there. So pretty exciting stuff. But I'm excited to introduce Landon, because that's why we're here. And many of you may know Landon, but if you don't, Landon was born and raised in Browning, graduated from Browning High School, and has been working for the last number of years for Blackfeet Fish Wildlife in a variety of different ways, mostly working with their bear program, but also on some other projects. And he's most recently working, nearly completed now, his master's in wildlife biology from the University of Montana. So we're very excited for him for that, although he confessed to me he's actually a Bobcat fan, so for those of us who understand these relationships around here. But he's been working really hard the last couple of years on a moose study to try to better estimate moose population abundance and recruitment on Blackfeet Reservation and Glacier Park on the east side here. And then he hopes, we were talking afterwards, he may go on, is considering going on to do a PhD in further ungulate research or other subjects, or else potentially come back and working full-time for Blackfeet Fish and Wildlife. So exciting to see people from the community going on and getting these skills and coming back to help benefit the land, the wildlife, and the community here. So Landon, thanks for the work that you're doing, and we're very excited to learn what you've discovered. One thing, when we're having dinner tonight, I did ask him what was kind of one of the fun things he learned about moose. And he said that the young calves grow really quickly because the mothers have an unusually high fat content in their milk compared to some other species. So it's one of the reasons that moose calves get large at a very high rate. So I think it's fairly. So I'll let him share a lot more about that because he's the expert. I'm just the introducer. So Landon, thank you so much for coming tonight, and we're glad to have you.
Sure. Thank you, Peter. Yeah, my name is Landon Magee. I'm a part-time seasonal wildlife biologist for the Blackfeet Fish and Wildlife Department. I start working in the summers between school semesters. And in the fall and spring, I'm a graduate student at the University of Montana in the Wildlife Biology program. I got my bachelor's in wildlife biology as well from the University of Montana in 2021, and am hoping to complete my master's this coming fall semester. And today I'll be talking to you guys about one chapter of my graduate thesis work, and that's titled Moose Abundance on the Blackfeet Indian Reservation and Glacier National Park. So for those of you who don't know, moose are kind of a widespread species in continental North America. They range from the very northern tip of Alaska and all the way down to the southern edge of Colorado. However, despite kind of their widespread distribution in this area, many populations are facing serious threats, and which have resulted in declines in several populations. Oh, okay. Okay. And just to kind of give you a little context of these declines, here's a few clippings from previous studies and news reports. This one from the Center for Biological Diversity talks about the potential for listing moose as an endangered species in Minnesota, North Dakota, and Michigan. And in these areas especially, have been reported declines of up to 50 to 60%. And a lot of that is due to tick and brainworm. So a lot of parasite driven declines. And then even in Nova Scotia, oh, that's okay.
Should I go back?
No, that's okay. Even in Nova Scotia, they actually are listed under the Canadian version of the ESA as a threatened species. And then kind of closing in on, at a finer scale, moose populations along the southern edge, especially areas in Alberta, Saskatchewan, Montana, North Dakota, and Wyoming, and Idaho are all experiencing declines in their populations as well. Oh, next one. And so it's become really apparent for many biologists and agencies to implement monitoring and survey methods and programs to really understand what's causing these declines, reasons behind them, potential conservation plans to support moose population growth. However, many of the traditional and conventional survey methods we use involve aerial surveys and GPS collaring. These are kind of the most reliable survey methods many agencies use. But as you can imagine, renting a helicopter and flying for several hours a day throughout the winter month, it can be pretty expensive, as well as GPS and VHF collars are also really expensive. I think a collar costs upwards of $5,000 a collar. And moose are such a low density species that you would need a lot of those to even get good data to understand kind of those population dynamics. And where funding is limited for many agencies, they often rely on hunter and public surveys, harvest statistics, vehicle collisions, and even just professional opinions kind of resulting from anecdotal data from the public or biologists there. And while these are relatively cheap to do, they're also frequently unreliable and come with a lot of uncertainty just because they revolve kind of more around the human dimension side of thing, and getting enough people to respond to those surveys kind of is a challenge in and of itself. Next. And then moose themselves pose a really unique challenge. So they're one of the more difficult ungulates to survey given their behavior and ecology. So like I mentioned, they usually exist at relatively low densities, especially compared to things like deer and elk. They're solitary animals, so they, don't aggregate in the winter months or throughout the year really like deer and elk do. They're unmarked individuals, meaning they have no unique markings that lets you differentiate one individual from another. So that makes it hard to do a lot of the more conventional survey methods. They also live in densely forested areas, making sightability more difficult. So even if you do have the funding available for aerial surveys, finding them is pretty difficult given that they're kind of just in this really brushy stuff. And then a lot of agencies don't have a lot of funding or resources available given that they don't generate as much income as things like deer and elk do through hunting licenses. And so there's kind of this need for a more cost-effective and reliable monitoring effort and framework to be able to estimate species like moose who are difficult to survey. And so that's kind of where trail cameras come in. So trail cameras in wildlife biology have exploded in the last decade or so, becoming a more useful tool for many agencies, given that they only require a large upfront cost. So maintaining them beyond that upfront cost is relatively cost effective. They're also non-invasive, meaning that you're not disturbing the animal, you're not really disturbing the habitat they're in and damaging it any further. They're easy to use and maintain, and then they have kind of this multiple use framework that lets you collect data on a variety of different species in a single field effort. And so part of my research is to understand how cameras can be used and how beneficial they are to estimate moose population demographics with a focus on abundance which I'll be talking about today. And then the second part of my thesis is how well they work for estimating things like calf-cow ratios. And so part of this research was done in collaboration with the Blackfeet tribe. Being from here, it's kind of been important to me to come back and work for my tribe and understand kind of the natural resource issues that I've come to understand growing up here. And then working with Glacier National Park, who we border neighbor here to the west, we were able to kind of collaborate and get this study going between both agencies. And so this area, for those of you, I'm sure many of you already know, is a very important area for habitat and wildlife. We're part of the crown of the continent ecosystem, which is one of the largest, most intact ecosystems in the entire world. So we have a lot of undisturbed habitat that's beneficial to a variety of important mammals and predators, including, of course, moose, elk, white-tailed deer, mule deer as well, and even bighorn sheep. And then in this area particularly, we have a large predator complex. So we have kind of the 4 or 5 big game predators, including black bears, grizzly bears, wolves, and mountain lions. And so working with the park, working with the ungulate biologists with Glacier National Park and wildlife managers here on the reservation, we were able to identify areas in which we believe were the most prominent moose habitat, and then into the park areas where moose are able to, where there's kind of transboundary movement between the park and reservation. And so we were able to delineate this study area as our focus for understanding kind of population dynamics on the reservation and in Glacier National Park. And so using this study area, between 2022 and 2023, we deployed a network of 161 trail cameras. So the first summer we did 100, and then due to availability issues, the following year we were only able to put out 61 cameras. And all these cameras were truly random, so we threw this study area into a coding program and told it to generate 100 random points. And so it just picked 100 random points throughout our study area, and those are the points that we had to hike to and put cameras up. And our cameras were set to take one picture every 15 minutes, so that's part of its time-lapse function, which is an important method for our models that we're using. We started to deploy these cameras the end of May, just as calving season began. And then we were able to get everything collected by Thanksgiving break, end of November. And then at each camera, we took measurements of how much area each camera was sampling, so the view shed in front of the camera. And that's also an important variable for our models. And so once cameras were collected, data was organized, processed, and stored, and then each photo was classified based on images, classified based on preset characteristics such as species, age, sex, number of species present. And yeah, and so this is kind of the template that we were using. So we were also collecting data on the more important large ungulates and predators as well. And so I'll just do a quick run through, but this is the model we were using. This is a space to event model. This model was developed in 2018, so it's relatively new. A PhD student at the University of Montana has been working on getting this going, and it's kind of gained popularity just in the last 2 or 3 years, given its applicability to other species as well. And so this model basically uses the sum of areas sampled. So for each camera, those areas that it was measuring, the sum of areas until you get your first detection. So just as an example, we have this occasion here. So this time period here, we had 3 cameras out, and our first detection was here in camera 1. So our space to event measurement for this occasion would be the area of camera 1, which is this triangular sector here. And then at another occasion, J2, we had 3 cameras out as well, but we had a detection, our first detection here in camera 2. So our space to event measurement for this J2 occasion is the area of camera 1 plus the area of camera 2. And using those space to event measurements, we were able to build encounter histories and then extrapolate those to an abundance and density estimate. And so essentially at each camera, we were basically taking a mini census and then kind of averaging those across cameras for certain occasions. And then that's how we got our total estimate for the entire study period, or whatever time period we decided to do that estimate for. And so in 2022, I think we had just over 2.1 million photos altogether between all 100 cameras. And then like I mentioned earlier, we had the time-lapse function, which is 1 picture every 15 minutes. But we also had the motion detection function working simultaneously with that. And so we broke down moose detections by age and sex. So we had cow moose, moose antlerless, bull moose, calves, and individuals we were unable to identify. And those are broken down between the different detection types. And so in 2022, we had a total of just over 23,000 total moose detections. And in 2022, they were actually our second most detected species, just behind elk. I think elk, we had 23,500 detections. So pretty similar detection rates between both species. In 2022, like I mentioned earlier, we had 39 less cameras, but we still had over 23,000 moose detections, which is kind of surprising given that camera reduction. And in 2023, moose were our most detected species by far. I think the second most detected species in 2023 was white-tailed deer, and it was only like 17,000 detections. And elk that year dropped to just below 10,000. So we were getting a lot of moose detections both years. And so using that data and plugging that into our model and running the analysis, we were able to come up with this estimate between years. So in 2022, our initial space to event estimate was 284 moose between July and September, so over a 2-month period, 3-month period. And then these bars here you see are the 95% confidence intervals. So that's just saying we're 95% confidence that our estimate falls somewhere between these 2 bars here. And then surprisingly, given that we only had 61 cameras in 2023, our estimate was much larger. So we had an estimate of 545 total moose. And then kind of, that was really surprising. So we went back, combed through the data, and realized that we had just a lot more detections on that side with those time-lapse photos. and then as well as sampling less space that year and then trying to extrapolate that to a larger area than we did the first year, biased our estimates pretty high. And so to account for that data, or that discrepancy, we ran another model in which we bootstrapped, so we randomized detection times across the entire study period, and that cut down on kind of the difference in detections. And so in using this method in 2022, we had an estimate of 172 moose. And as you can see, there's some overlap here between the 2022 estimates. But what we really wanted was this 2023 estimate to come down because we knew that there were issues with that year. And so using that method, we got an estimate of 321 moose, which aligns pretty closely with our estimate from the first year that we were most confident in. And as you can see between this estimate here, we had pretty much an entire overlap between both years. Yeah, and that's just showing that. And so kind of looking back at the discrepancies in those estimates and figuring out kind of what went wrong with our sampling plan, one of the other issues we had was consecutive detections of moose. So we had a lot of instances in which a moose laid down in front of the camera, took a nap, and we had 10, 15 back-to-back-to-back photos of that same moose. And so that caused their estimates to go up pretty high. And we had, like I mentioned, we had a lot more of those in 2023. And so because we were using that 15-minute sampling interval, we weren't allowing that individual enough time to redistribute on the landscape. And the model actually assumes that your sampling interval is long enough for that to happen. So moving forward, we plan to increase this sampling interval to at least an hour, especially for this area where we know based on that data that we have a pretty dense population. We also only sampled pretty high quality habitat, so we stayed away from a lot of the grassland areas where we knew we weren't going to get any moose detections. But in doing so, we also may have biased our estimates high because we were assuming that this area we know we are going to get moose, and that led to those higher than normal estimates. And then like I mentioned before, we had less cameras in 2023, and therefore we were sampling less space than those estimates, or sampling less space than the first year. And so the model, because we had similar detections between both years, and then less area in the second year, our model assumed that population was denser. And so extrapolating that density out to the broader study area caused those estimates to be a lot higher than the first year. Yeah. And so kind of moving forward with this, this was kind of a methodological test to determine how well cameras actually work for estimating these demographic parameters for moose. And so kind of looking at the application of this space to event model for moose moving forward as well, and seeing how well it does given moose ecology, moose behavior, and looking back at our sampling plan. And then this study was kind of put more in place to help the reservation determine the status of their moose population. So moose on the Blackfeet Reservation provide a huge source of income for the tribe through the sale of hunting tags. But we didn't have any baseline abundance estimate for moose, so we really had no idea how well they were doing. And so using the data from this study, we're hoping to develop more appropriate management strategies based on these results. And then another big thing was identifying areas that we didn't previously know were important habitat for moose, so kind of looking at those detection hotspots between years, figuring out where we were getting more detections, and then what type of habitat as well, whether it was coniferous forests, so pine trees and or more deciduous areas where we had aspens and willow thickets and swamp bottoms. And so just identifying areas where we can implement these management strategies to improve moose habitat and hopefully keep them from declining as well. And then, like I mentioned, moose hunting on the reservation provides a huge source of revenue. They serve as a form of sustenance in the winter months as well. But without that knowledge of how well our moose population is doing, we were really just issuing tags very conservatively so that we were avoiding the implications of overharvest, but still providing that opportunity for tribal and non-tribal members. So then, using this data, we hope to decide what our moose population status is, and whether or not this population can support more tags, and if it does, that increases our revenue stream and as well as our ability to continue conservation efforts for moose and other species on the reservation. So next steps moving forward from here, we plan to use another model. This one is an instantaneous sampler model, so an IS model. It's very similar to the Space to Event one. It's kind of in the same suite of family as the Space to Event. The assumptions for that model are a little more lax than the Space to Event, so that allows us to kind of bypass that issue with differences in detections and area sampled. And then, like I mentioned at the beginning, I've been also looking at calf-cow ratios, so estimating the abundance of calves and cows, and then using that as an index for recruitment rate, so how many calves are being recruited into the population after that summer period. And then working this summer with Fish and Wildlife, we plan to do another study. This one won't be part of my master's thesis, but just a broader study for the reservation. This time we'll be extending our study area out to the southern edge of the reservation and all the way to the Canadian border to include more potential habitat for moose, and then as well as collect data for a lot of other species, especially grizzly bears and other predators. And just like to acknowledge my committee, Buzz Cabell with Blackfeet Fish and Wildlife, Mark Beal with Glacier National Park, a variety of project associates who helped with coding and sampling, design, setup, my technicians who helped a lot with camera deployment, hiking with me all summer and sorting through thousands of trail camera photos, my friends and family, and then funding sources from the Boone and Crockett program, University of Montana, Blackfeet Fish and Wildlife program, and then the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Tribal Wildlife Grant program. And with that, I'll take any questions.
This is really interesting because you had mentioned that there is like no historical data from Blackfeet Fish and Wildlife on moose populations. But those of us who have lived here for many years have seen the dramatic increase in moose numbers. Mm-hmm. And you know, that anecdotal kind of information is really interesting, that I don't know if there's any way you could incorporate that into your, you know, just into your study, not that you can present data, but into your study, because it's been quite dramatic.
Yeah.
And, I'm sure there are a lot of elders and people who have lived here for many years who have seen that, and it's just great. I'm really happy to see that you're collecting some data. That's wonderful. Yeah,
thank you. Yeah, it's been really interesting because the state is actually doing some collaring efforts just south of the reservation along the front, and they've seen increase in that smaller population down there. So at kind of a more localized scale, we are seeing those increases or stable to increasing populations, but kind of looking at it from a more regional, statewide province-wide perspective, there seems to be this slow decline. So yeah, that's interesting.
Was there a change in the number of permits put out between 2022 and 2023 on the reservation, you know?
There was one change. I think we do 5 tribal bow tags, 5 tribal rifle tags, and then 5 non-member tags. And I think in the fall of 2023, we partnered with Fish, Wildlife, and Parks to do a lottery system for the entire state. So there was the 1 extra tag, 1 or 2 extra tags, but not a huge difference, yeah.
So with the tags and the numbers that you just shared with us, what's the success rate?
I'm not sure what the success rate is. We try to get people to report those, and I know we don't usually get people reporting their harvest success, so that's, yeah, we haven't really looked into that.
People that do get a tag are required to go with a Blackfeet outfitter. Right?
Yeah, non-tribal members are required to.
What's the allocation for tribal members for harvesting moose?
5 bow tags and 5 rifle tags, so 10 total.
And that's on a lottery system as well?
Yeah, that's a lottery system. The non-member is an auction system.
Okay.
And the minimum bid for those tags is $14,000, and it usually gets up to $35,000.
So I have 2 questions. I was under the understanding that initially the tribe didn't have a moose season. When did they start doing that? How long ago?
Yeah, I'm not sure when they implemented a moose season. I know in like the 80s and 90s we didn't have hunting seasons at all, so everything was kind of free game.
And the other question is, I've read I think it was in Montana Outdoors, that they're blaming the decrease a lot on climate change and winter deer ticks, or ticks. I was wondering if maybe our population might be healthier because of our lousy winters, you know?
Yeah. It seems that way. I know like a lot of moose in Utah, Colorado, they have really bad tick problems down there. And from talking with the state biologists, it doesn't seem to be as prevalent in Montana, but kind of with the less severe winters, it does seem to be slowly creeping up north. And then just based on kind of our pictures, we didn't really have a lot of moose that had hair loss due to ticks. They look pretty healthy, so.
I heard that it's something like that makes the hair turn gray.
Yeah.
Moose, is that right?
Yeah, it basically kills the hair and causes them to itch, so they're rubbing everything off, and so they just look like kind of mangy.
They look old.
Yeah.
I was wondering, do you have any information relevant to the tick and the winters being less severe further north? Do you have any data from up north about that same issue?
I haven't specifically heard anything. I know it's not a very big issue in Canada, and they have such a large moose population that they don't really see any declines. So, yeah, I know kind of in the Alberta, Saskatchewan area it might be a little more prevalent, but further north I don't really see it as a big issue yet.
I remember reading also years ago that when they were trying to get moose and reintroduce moose in the Northeast, that it was really impeded by the fact that there were whitetails there, and they were co-hosts for a hart firm, I think it was, that the moose were really susceptible to.
Yeah.
Deer were kind of adapted to, you know.
Yeah, there's been a lot of studies about the relationship between ticks, moose, and other ungulates like elk and deer. I know they're doing some of that further south here. So.
Given the fairly high estimate of moose from your work, is the tribe interested in increasing funding for your work or other more high-intensity research?
Hopefully, yeah. I think, you know, this is kind of really only the second time that I've actually talked about these results. And I think once kind of my thesis is defended and published and ready to, you know, kind of in its final form, then it would be time to sit down with Fish and Wildlife and talk about what that means moving forward as far as tag allocation and future monitoring efforts. And I know now we're doing a bigger camera study. We have more cameras in a larger area, so.
The other question is, the areas that you sampled were not the entire study area, is that right? You had a polygon, the tribe and park areas, but you only sampled a part of that. When you came up with the estimate, was that for the whole area or just the area sampled?
So that was for that entire study area, so that polygon in the park and on the reservation.
Do you think any really low-intensity monitoring would help, like simultaneous counts, like are done for loons and other species that are done like in the same day? I thought of that for mini glacier where you can go to Fisher Cap Lake and see several moose, but you don't know if those are the same ones you see downstream.
Yeah.
But if you had enough people out on the same day around the same time, you could get a simultaneous count at least.
Yeah, and that's something that's been done like in early studies, and like you mentioned with loons, people are still doing that kind of work with other species, and I see it being helpful, and it's something that can be done, especially if you were able to kind of integrate both methods to kind of determine, you know, accuracy between the two or something like that. But I think just with our limited capacity at the tribe, that's something that we can't do as a department. And I know there's a lot of like citizen science programs as well that may be able to help with that.
A real quick clarification question. So the population estimate that you came up with, does that include the portions of Glacier National Park that were within your sampling area, or does it just include the portion of your sampling area that was on the Blackfeet Reservation?
In the park as well, yeah. So that estimate is for this entire area.
Is there any way you can tell what kind of damage poaching does, or how much poaching there is, or you guys get any indication at all?
We get reports every now and then. It's just so hard with, like I mentioned, we have such a limited number of employees at the department and such a large area to cover that it's, you know, hard, especially in rural areas where it's easier to poach and get away with it. And I know that's kind of an issue for a lot of other species here. And yeah, I just don't know how much it affects moose.
How about chronic wasting? Is that get into the moose population yet, or?
Not that we know of. We just had the one white-tailed deer detection. I think that was in 2018 or 2019, and they've done a lot of culling efforts and set up mandatory testing for hunters. And since then, we haven't had another detection. So, yeah, we're working on doing another camera study in that area where we detected CWD to look at kind of deer population and deer occupancy rates as well. But yeah, we haven't seen it in our deer herd any more than the one, and so our transmission to moose is really rare as well. I don't think there's been a lot of reported cases of that.
Does any data extrapolate moose calf predation?
No, so we really didn't look at that, and we kind of struggled getting out that many cameras in that kind of initial birth pulse. And I was actually only going to do one field season, and as soon as we got done processing that first year, we noticed that we weren't getting a whole lot of calf detections. And so we decided to do a second field season to see if that was the same case that same year or the following year. And using those calf-cow ratios and looking at kind of monthly estimates, maybe we can reason that there might be some predation causing declines if there's any. But yeah, without kind of going in and collaring calves and looking at causes of predation on calves, it's hard to really determine that effect.
Any other questions for Landon?
I have a question. This larger area here, of your study area,
Yeah.
that's not really forested area, isn't that just plains?
So kind of, most of it is forested, kind of just this area.
Okay.
Kind of this eastern half of it is more kind of in that transition zone to the grassland and prairie.
A lot of that area is pasteurized land.
Yeah.
How do those moose handle the fences?
So we kind of avoided sampling out there because we knew we weren't going to get a whole lot of detections there anyways. We did have a few kind of in these smaller drainages coming out of those forested areas. And just with a regular 5-strand barbed wire fence, I don't think there's really an issue with that.
Just walk over?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, they'll just jump over. Yeah.
Really?
And especially in this area, there's all kinds of breaks in the fences and ways to get around. So
this, I don't know if you know the answer to this or not, but this, I have a couple of security cameras on my house, and I think it was in March, they photographed, it did a video of this cow and calf that came in to browse my birch trees.
yeah.
And I think it was a moose, a male calf, and it kept mounting the female, and she kept fending it off. And I wondered if that was normal behavior, and if that's, it's probably getting time for her to kick him out anyway.
Yeah.
But have you ever seen that or heard of that?
I don't think so, no. We really didn't have any instances of that on any of our photos. We had a couple video cameras out the first year, but yeah, we really didn't see any of that. Like I mentioned, we really didn't see a whole lot of calves, so a lot of our videos were just either lone cows or bulls, or bachelor bulls, a couple bachelor bulls together.
I got 2 questions. So with the upcoming camera study, will you be using all camera as data? Or like your previous project, will you be choosing more bias points as in moose habitat?
Probably more bias because it's not for a thesis, so it's not as rigorous requirements when you go to publish in wildlife journals. And it's, no, that's okay. And yeah, I mean, bias points, they're still like truly random points, so there's not really a whole lot of bias to that, to the point where it's gonna affect it a whole lot.
My upcoming question was, would this be considered a 3rd field season for you?
Most likely, yeah. But it wouldn't go in any of the thesis or report. It would just be for the Fish and Wildlife Department moving forward.
I was curious if you know if there's any data from the national park side of things on moose populations that maybe feeds into your guys' work, or just like provides some more insight into the local area? Yeah, so in talking with the ungulate biologist at the park, I think the last moose study they did was like 65 years ago. So pretty limited data there. I know they do a lot of camera stuff with a focus on other species like lynx especially. So I guess there's probably the option to use some of that data as well. But yeah, they really don't have a whole lot of insight, up-to-date data on anything.
There was work in the North Fork in the 80s and 90s, but it was with telemetry, trapping and collaring. It was a master's thesis and then a long-term study, the wolf ecology project. Did some moose work, but it was on the west side.
Yeah, it seems like there's a lot of other stuff happening just outside.
Let me ask to go back about how you, the STE model, I didn't quite understand, how you just review. It's interesting, how you captured the, what's the space to event model? How you know which camera is the first detection?
So
is it based on like timestamps on the photos, or how do you know?
Yeah. So all that data, that was part of in the template. It takes record of every day, hour, minute, second.
Okay.
And then the model, when you run it in the coding program, it re-randomizes the order of cameras it samples. So for this occasion, it goes 1, 2, 3. For this occasion, it goes, this one's 1, that one's 2, that one's 3. And so for each different occasion, it sets the order of camera. And so we have each camera labeled, and so it knows which camera is which, and then looks at those timestamps.
So there's more than the 3 cameras, so it go on and label all 20 or 30
Yeah, so,
cameras.
yeah.
And then when there's a detection within a period of time on one of those cameras,
It's pretty statistically.
So it's trying to see where the detection happened first.
Yeah, that's the space to event. So space to your first event, space to first detection.
The area that camera covers, the lens.
Yeah.
Field of view covers.
Yeah.
So you have to measure all of those.
Yeah. So if you go back to the methods, maybe.
What's that one?
I think one more. Yeah. So this right here is kind of the camera.
Yeah.
And then we use the board that was divided into these 6 sectors, and just sat right in front of the camera. And we use the angle of the lens to determine kind of that width, how far you're looking outwards. And then you just use a rangefinder or tape measure and measure the area of each sector, and then calculate that into the total area.
Okay. And so then you have that number for all 100 cameras.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then so when it does picks which one has the first detection, it's taking the area of that particular camera based on the area of all of them.
So it'll take the sum of each camera until you get to that first detection.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Got it?
I appreciate the greater explanation. I think I can get there, but we'll.
Yeah, we had another one that we were trying to use. It was a time to event, and that's based more on the time until you get your first detection, but that uses precise movement rates, and without GPS collars, it's really hard to get those, especially for our specific location, because movement rates could vary pretty significantly between different areas.
Okay. And so that's trying to help account for not having multiple detections of the same use.
Yeah, the model will usually account for that unless you get those long strings of consecutive detections.
How long do the calves nurse?
I think up until kind of mid to late fall, maybe.
So just that first year
Yeah.
they're born?
Mm-hmm.
I see.
Yeah, and then they'll usually just switch over to browse.
I see. And you talked at dinner with Peter about how rich the milk is.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk about that? Is that something you read in in your research in school, or you've investigated that, or?
Yeah, so the first winter we were picking up cameras, I think it was in October. We were coming off a hill and we seen a cow and her calf run by, and the calf was already greater than half the size of the mom. And that was her first calf of the year. And so I was talking to my advisor about it back in Missoula, and he actually did a lot of moose calf research in Minnesota, and that was something they found, was that the fat content in the milk was much higher than a lot of other ungulates.
Interesting.
Yeah, and then that just kind of explains why they're such big animals in the first place.
Well, and the pictures that you showed of the bulls around here?
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah. Yeah, that's why our moose hunts are so expensive.
Wow.
I'm just wondering, what impact do moose have in the environment in an area?
So kind of looking at their diet, they can overgraze or overbrowse certain areas, and especially like thinking about areas in which you get like a fire come through and your saplings start to sprout, they'll browse the tops of those and affect kind of recolonization of trees and plants, and they can overbrowse. The largest part of their diet is willows, and so they can overbrowse that as well, and there's been some research done on that in the past, and I haven't really looked into that too much, and then kind of at the top-down effects, they just mostly serve, moose calves especially serve as an important source of prey for bears especially. Yeah.
Well, it's just, in Colorado, I'm from Colorado, and in the 60s I worked in Glacier National Park, Rocky Mountain National Park. No moose at all, you know. So
Yeah.
And then, I guess they brought in like, I don't know, between 12 or something by helicopter from Utah, transplanted them, and then they did it one at a time, and now the moose are just everywhere.
Yeah.
So I just wondered, you know, why do you think they would transplant moose? I mean, do they have a benefit, or is it just?
You know, I'm not sure, because like historically, there isn't a whole lot of evidence that moose were even in those areas kind of prior to European contact, and they just kind of started to recolonize or come down from Canada, and I think that's just kind of objectives of the state agencies to bring them in and transplant them. And I know in Utah especially, they're having a lot of success with that. And then, yeah, like you mentioned, in Colorado and even like Arizona are seeing, we'll get a moose or two come across the border. So, yeah.
Let's take one last question and then we'll give our thanks to Landon.
I was gonna, I guess with like the reintroduction of the emu, and it's kind of cool that you're getting this preliminary data in similar time frame as that's going on.
Yeah.
Do you foresee any impact on moose populations or competition over habitat with the return of bison to the landscape? I know that like Chief Mountain Range Unit's a little north of this study.
I don't see there being a whole lot of impact, just because bison are more grazers and moose are like to use the browse more, they're browsers, so there's kind of a big difference in the diet. And then I think just our bison release is so small and kind of infrequent, given that they're already trying to move back out onto the plains, that they, for now, there's probably not an impact at all. And with this coming summer, we're hoping to survey that area. And then we have a person coming in and kind of looking at those effects that bison are having on the landscape. So might see something in the future.
Go ahead, Steve.
I just want to say before Peter jumps in that you've done a fantastic job. The research is incremental, so as you add little bits of information, you're advancing the knowledge. And you didn't answer all of the questions we have or anyone has, but this is a great first step, and you've done a wonderful job.
Yeah, thank you.
We're going to thank you for coming and sharing the hard work that you've done.
Yeah,
I'm
thank
excited
you.
to see what you continue to do with this project and also with your wildlife career. That'll be really fun.
Thank you.
And as a token of our gratitude, I want to provide you can pick out a different color or size if you want, but this nice sun shirt, because apparently you spend a lot of time in the field.
Yeah.
And you need a little cover up, but the back was designed by Jessie Stevenson. She's Blackfeet artist, families from here and elsewhere, and lives in Missoula. You might know her, but protected Badger 2 medicine. So
cool.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it.